Hello, welcome to another episode of History Hack. We have a returning guest today. Alex, who have we got?
We do. We have Andrew Chatterton with us from the Cold Hill Auxiliary Research Team, CART, who joined us a few weeks back to give us an excellent, bonkers rundown of the British resistance and how they were going to resist, funnily enough, a Nazi invasion of our wonderful little island. And it was brilliant, but we didn't finish the whole story because we talked about one group, but not the other, didn't we, Andrew?
That's correct. Yeah, there's a whole other side of
bonkersness.
Craziness, yeah.
So, of course, we love crazy shit on this podcast, so we invited you back. How you doing?
Yeah, very well, very well. How are you?
I love the way everybody says that immediately without thinking, when everyone just wants to go, I'm shit. I hate COVID. I hate lockdowns. Life is crap. Anyway.
Still.
But we all go, yeah, I'm great, thanks. How are you?
We're talking about interesting stuff. It's all good. It's all good. It's not Brexit. It's not COVID. We're all good.
Yeah, because we are British. So we're like, oh, yes, everything's wonderful. Right, okay. Talk us through Operation Sea Lion. What was it?
So Operation Sea Lion was the German plan, in inverted commas, for invading the UK. And this is obviously what the auxiliary units and what the Special Duties Branch, who we're going to be talking about today, were set up to resist. But Sea Lion itself is a bit strange because it was classic Hitler, I'd say, because he had his three armed forces, so Navy, Air Force, Army, all working on very separate plans. No coordination between the two as well. And it's that classic Hitler thing of separating individuals so they didn't get too powerful.
So this is it's come up twice already now on History Hack. It was not a real plan, was it?
No, and even he did his Führer Directive 16 in 16th of July 1940, something like that. But even the directive was basically, he said, I've decided to prepare a landing operation to land in England, and if necessary, carry it out. So even the directive wasn't like, we're going to do it. It was like, well, we'll see how it goes. And I feel like they had no idea about crossing the channel, really. I mean, Germany's, mainly rivers. That's what they've done up until now. They didn't really take the channel very seriously. As I said, they had three competing armed forces putting together different plans and arguing about whether their individual plans could work. We had Goering, who basically said he could win it with the Air Force. It was just, it was
a typical Nazi shit show, isn't it?
It was all, and you just get the impression that they just presumed that Britain would surrender, that we would see that we're in a position of no hope, and after France surrendered, that the game was up. So they just didn't bother. Although, saying that, I mean, Admiral Raeder started planning for a potential invasion of Britain back in autumn 1939, when Hitler was first talking about invading the West. So from the naval perspective, they started thinking about it. But nothing concrete was ever really put together. They trained. They did lots of training. Soldiers trained in these flat-bottom craft that were going to come across. But there was no real plan to really get across with that would be anywhere near effectively. The only thing all three armed forces had in common, the only consensus they had, was that the RAF had to be defeated before anything could be considered. But even then, we had, we've got the best navy in the world, and the German navy, the Kriegsmarine, had taken a hell of a beating in Norway. So
Phil Weir talked about it as well, and he just said the German naval force it's never gonna win.
No, but all of that being said, of course, saying that, I feel like Churchill, in the back of his mind, didn't think they would invade. But
then how silly would you look if they suddenly did?
Well, correct. And actually, and people talk about this, that by the end of 1940, that the threat was more or less gone. But actually, if Barbarossa had gone well and they'd knocked the Soviet Union out, then they'd come straight back and with a full force and invaded us then. So the threat was continuing. And as long as the threat was there, the need to have some kind of formations in place that could resist or hold up an invading army was important, and hence why both the auxiliary units and special duties carried on all the way through till 44.
Well, Britain must have been really happy by the end of 41 when Barbarossa was pretty much failing. They were like, yep, this is going to be a breeze.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, but so by the end of 41, Barbarossa was failing. The Japanese attacked, well, just yesterday, attacked Pearl Harbor, and suddenly the US was on our side, and suddenly Germany was facing Russia, us, and the US. You know, by the end of 41, I think we were in a better place, certainly.
So tell us, what was the Special Duties Branch?
So the Special Duties Branch comes out. So as you might remember, as we talked about last time with the auxiliary units, the auxiliary units came from two areas. One was the military intelligence research with Peter Fleming and his guys in Kent. And the other area was from SIS, so MI6, and their home defence scheme, where you might remember they were just going around planting explosives in bridges and stuff without telling anyone. But there was another section to the home defence scheme, which was the intelligence gathering side, which is much more in line with obviously what SIS is all about. And this intelligence gathering side was transferred at the same time as the blowing stuff up side to Colonel Gubbins and the auxiliary units. So there was two separate branches, and they were kept separate as well. So they were two separate organisations, but run from by Gubbins to start with in 1940. And it was this intelligence side that eventually became the Special Duties Branch. And it was essentially civilian spies, or observers as they were called, and wireless operators who would have spied on the German army as they came through their town or village, taking notes of vehicles and numbers and weapons, etc., and then passing on that information. And it's all about trying to ensure that we weren't in a situation as in what happened in France during the Blitzkrieg or in the Low Countries, where the German army is kind of rolling through unhindered. The civilian population, quite understandably, were on the road trying to escape and flee. But in doing so, we're kind of getting in the way. Huge amounts of confusion, no idea what the Germans were, where they were going. They would just appear. And the idea behind Special Duties Branch is that civilians would stay behind, would stay put as the Germans came through their town, and then pass on that information so that the regular army had some idea of where the Germans were, in what numbers and what vehicles they had, so they could either counterattack or prepare for the invasion of the next area. So it's about taking away that uncertainty, that chaos that we saw during the Blitzkrieg of 1940.
So who can be part of the Special Duties Branch? What's the difference between the people that went into that and the people that went into the auxiliary units? Yeah,
so the main difference is, so the auxiliary units were made up of men only in reserved occupations, usually kind of farmers and gamekeepers and people like that. And they were, as we talked about, trained in sabotage and guerrilla warfare and to blow things up and to assassinate people when necessary.
So cause chaos, basically.
Correct, absolutely. Anything that held up the German army, even for a couple of days, that was their role. The Special Duties Branch had nothing to do with explosives or guns. It was all about intelligence gathering, and they set up in a very similar way to the auxiliary units. Intelligence officers, who we know very little about, were sent to the key counties, again, that were vulnerable to invasion, and they were there to find what they called key men. So usually someone of some standing within a town or a village, like a doctor or a vicar or someone like that. And then these key men would then recruit observers and runners. So these were people, these were not men of call-up age. These were people who could easily walk around their town and village as the Germans passed through without attracting attention. So you wouldn't want a 35-year-old farmer looking at the German.
You'd want a doddery old lady.
Correct. You want a doddery old lady. You want a vicar. You'd want a doctor. You want.
I'd be gutted if I got recruited and then they sent me to the auxiliaries and not the blowing stuff up branch.
Yeah. So yeah, you would be. You would be a bit, wouldn't you? But this is. So they recruited everyone from, like, as I said, vicars, doctors, teenagers. So like 15, 16-year-old kids were recruited.
Sorry, Alex, you're out.
Yeah, I'm done.
Trained in recognising these German formations and vehicles, and putting down what they'd seen in code, in messages, putting it in dead letter drops, which we can talk about a bit later. Then a large number of runners and messengers would pick up these messages from various drops and pass them on to civilian wireless operators who had wireless sets. So, these key men would have, like, vicars. We've got examples of vicars we know they had their wireless sets in their pulpit, or a publican whose wireless set was up in the roof of the pub, or we've got farmers whose wireless sets were in chicken sheds, like disguised chicken sheds. So you'd look in the chicken shed and all you'd see, obviously, are chickens feeding, all that kind of stuff. But there was a disguised end of the shed where the wireless set was, where they could be communicating. And like the aux units, it was highly secret. So they all signed the Official Secrets Act again. So they didn't tell anyone. And it was so secret. So using the chicken shed example, there was a chap in Kent or Essex, I think, who had
one of those places.
One of those ones.
One of those really COVID-y places.
Yeah. He had his radio set in his chicken shed, and one day he was kind of walking out there to do some training, and he saw a soldier with a big radio mast on his back and radio set from the Royal Corps of Signals, and he basically went up to this soldier and said, "Well, can I help you?" And he said, "Yeah, we've been getting these weird wireless messages we've picked up. We can't work out where they're from or who they're from. And obviously their automatic assumption was that it was a German spy communicating back to Germany. So even the Royal Corps of Signals had no idea about the Special Duties Branch, because this guy was like, "Oh yeah, I'll definitely let you know if I hear anything," and then managed to persuade the Royal Corps of Signal guys to disappear. And then he went to his chicken shed and started communicating again on his wireless set. So the levels of secrecy were again really high, and if anything, higher than the auxiliary units. So by stand down, by 1944, they think there were around 233 wireless stations across the UK, and around about 3,250 members of the Special Duties Branch. And we know virtually, we're talking tens of people that we know were in it. Most people didn't say anything and went to the grave without saying anything. So the levels of secrecy and the way they kept it secret was remarkable.
It's the same as the auxiliary units that you were talking about last time. They literally went to the grave and not talked about it at all.
Yeah,
apart from the one guy that wrote a book and everyone else was like, "Dude,
yeah,
what?
Yeah. What the hell?"
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
oh, was it like? Do you remember the moody postwoman that you had to go and give the code to?
Yeah,
auxiliary units. Is there stuff like that going on?
I feel like there definitely was. So, for example, so a lot of the information we get around special duties is rumours and like folklore, and we have to try and dig out what was the truth. So, for example, there's a village in East Devon called Clifton Mary, and we know that there was a civilian wireless set somewhere in that area. And I was doing a talk the other day, and someone came up to me and he said, "Oh, talking about special duties. There was always a rumour about the spies at the Maltster's Inn or Maltster's Arms in Clifton Mary." And this apparently this elderly landlady who wasn't particularly pleasant to her patrons was actually had a wireless set in her loft, which she was she was part of this network of spies and wireless operators passing information on had the Germans invaded. So if the German army had gone through Cliff St Mary or an area around them, a message would eventually have got back to her, and she would have sent this on to, as we'll talk about later, to ATS girls who are in secret bunkers, like the ones that the auxiliary units are in. So there's this whole network of civilians, highly trained civilians, prepared. And again, like the auxiliary units, these guys were under no. They knew that if they were caught, they were gone, and they were very willing to make that sacrifice. But just the most remarkable people who have, and special duties more than auxiliary units, have had virtually no public recognition at all.
You said highly trained civilians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Talk us through their training.
So it's a bit different to the auxiliary units. So as far as we know, there was a headquarters near Coles Hill House, which was the headquarters of the auxiliary units. I think it's called Hannington Hall near Swindon. But as far as we know, there weren't like guys turning up there for training. We've spoken to a observer, a spy, who was a teenage girl at the time, who said that she had loads of pamphlets which she had to learn by heart, which included different formations and insignia of the German army and what the vehicles looked like and everything like that. And she had to learn that by heart. And she carried it around as she was learning it, she carried it around in her bra, so no one would spot it. But if the Germans had invaded, then she would have to have destroyed those leaflets immediately. But a lot of it was on the civilians to train themselves. So they were provided with the literature and the information, but they had to train themselves. In terms of the civilian wireless operators, Colonel Gubbins set up a auxiliary unit signals group, which were mainly either guys who were already in the Royal Corps of Signals or like radio enthusiasts, who before the war were like radio hams, to go around and set up these wireless sets for civilians and train them on how to use them. And these wireless sets could be, as I said, anywhere from a church to a pub. There's an example where one chap had a bunker dug underneath his outside toilet, where he would be sending messages from. So, and in the hedgerow outside the outside toilet, there was a what looked like a tree stump, but actually the top half swiveled round, and the messenger could place the message that they had in a kind of split tennis ball, and then push the tennis ball down this disguised tree stump, and it would make its way down to this underground bunker, and then he would transmit the information onto the ATS girls. So
absolutely love that.
I know, and just think so a German patrol would come along. They'd heard might have heard rumours about wireless, and they look inside this outside toilet, and they wouldn't see anything. It'd just be a normal outside toilet. What you have to do to lift up the outside toilet there's like a little water mains area outside, which you can lift up the lid, and there's a key. You turn the key, and suddenly you can lift up the whole of the toilet system. And underneath there's a ladder going down into the chamber. And even once you're in that chamber, there's nothing there. It just looks like a weird disguised like air raid shelter. Yeah. There's a hook, a closed hook, which you turn on a shelf, and that opens up a false wall, and it's there is the wireless set. So even if the Germans had gained entry somehow into this bunker underneath an outside toilet, the wireless operator could continue sending messages right until the last moment. And that that's what they were prepared for. But the levels of ingenuity were ridiculous. As
amazing. Where does the aerial go?
So the aerials so they're called outstations and sub-outstations, the civilian ones. They were usually up trees, or in the case of a church, up the tower. But the way they disguised the aerial they'd put it in the grooves of the tree, so you couldn't see it unless you looked really, really closely. And there's still some examples of where we know there was a civilian outstation, and you can still see the aerial wire going up the tree because it's glued in and attached. And that's what these signal guys did. They went round to these key areas, to these key men, and set up these radio stations for them and placed the aerials, replaced batteries on radio, taught them how to use these sets. And all of this goes against that, and the auxiliary units, goes against that view of Britain in 1940 of a country on its knees, of organised chaos everywhere. These guys were hugely organised and very well prepared. And I think that where we've spoken to Alan Allport or read his book, and he talks about that Shire folk mentality that people have of Britain in 1940, of kind of making do and just getting through by the skin of their teeth. It isn't that. It's hugely organised and very sophisticated. And because we had time to prepare, like we said last time, Poland didn't have any time to prepare. Although, interestingly, Colonel Gubbins, who set up the auxiliary units, was in Warsaw just as the Germans invaded to try and help the Polish set up some kind of resistance force. He just got there too late. So he had to come back. But we had time to prepare all this stuff because of the channel and because of Operation Sea Lion being a bit of a mess. We had time to prepare this stuff, and we did so really, really effectively.
That's amazing.
I want us to replicate one of those, Alex. Can we do that?
Yeah, let's do it. We'll build it. Well, can't we just do but we're only girls and get a bloke to build it while we film it or something?
Exactly. Perfect idea. Love it.
Andrew will build it. He loves this stuff.
Yeah, you ask my wife about whether I can do DIY, you will be. That is a definite no.
You've got some friends, they can help.
Yeah, that's true.
We must know some manly men. Obviously not
Wow.
Guy Walters. Do you remember the
window washing?
No, the lawnmower.
Oh,
and
yes.
Zach, no, with the washing machine.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
I would like to think he's manly, but he'd be rubbish as well.
So
Holmes
hint,
would just flat out tell you he spent his entire life at a desk and is incapable.
Hint,
Lockie?
Lockie's a good one. He's tall and manly. But
he can lift stuff at the very least because he's a giant.
That's true. That's very true.
Clive would just be like a foreman, I feel, telling them what they're doing wrong.
Yes, but he's a gentleman of a slightly advanced age.
Yeah, I'd feel guilty making him carry stuff around. We'll give it to Lockie.
Exactly.
Anyway, now that we've seized on everyone down the pub and press ganged them into this, what was expected of these people if Britain was invaded? I think you've more or less answered that, in that they were expected to die if necessary.
Yeah, essentially. As I said, they were going to stay put. They weren't going to get on the roads and flee. They were going to stay put in their towns and villages. They were going to wait for the Germans to go through, and the observers would write down what they're seeing in code on paper. And we spoke to a lady the other day whose dad, she didn't know what he did, but all she knew was he was trained to go and pick up messages, put the message under his tongue, walk up to a big house in the village and pass the message on. That's all she knew he did. She had no idea that it was to do with the Special Duties Branch. But that was it. You have the observers observing the German army coming through. The message would then be passed through these dead letter drops. So these were disguised areas where the message could be hidden and the observer would then pick it up. So it could be like a hollow key. So we've got examples of where you could unscrew the top of these kind of big keys that would be left in a door, and the message would be pushed in there. There's an example of a gate, a farm gate with a horseshoe on. If the horseshoe is the right way up, there's no message. If it's upside down, there's a message, and the message is contained in a fake gate bolt, which you can pull out, and the message is inside there. So the messengers would then pick up this information, pass it to other messengers through this dead letter drops, and it would eventually end up with one of these civilian wireless operators at an outstation. And the civilian wireless operator would then pass this message through. They didn't know who they were passing it to. All they got back was a message saying message received. But they were passing it to these ATS women who were in secret bunkers, disguised bunkers, across the country again, who would then themselves radio the message through to Army Command. So they'd have a much better picture of what the German Army were up to and where they were, and it'd be quite quick. To start with, it was all just done by word of mouth, but by the end of 1940, the civilians were given these wireless sets, so it was really, really quick. So within a couple of hours, the message was passed on that the Germans were in this village at this time, heading in this direction with this many vehicles, with these many weapons. And so the HQ would have a much better idea of what was going on, would have a bigger picture. And the ATS women are, they're remarkable. So even though they're not civilians, they were recruited. They were either already part of the ATS, or they were recruited through that kind of friends and family network. And the woman who headed it up was a lady called Beatrice Temple, who was the niece of the then Archbishop of Canterbury. So another great story. And she would, these women would be asked whether they'd want to be doing something possibly a bit dangerous, a bit interesting. They would go and be interviewed by Beatrice, and she'd be listening to their voice, whether they had a clear radio voice, something that could be understood over wireless. And the first interview would take place in the public lounge of the 4th floor of Harrods. This is the first interview that these women had no idea what they were signing up to, and there were multiple interviews, and it wasn't until like the 5th or 6th interview where they would be then say, okay, sign the Official Secrets Act, here's what you're going to be doing. And they would be told then, if the Germans invade, you have to go to your secret underground bunker, wait for messages to come through from these civilians, and then radio them on to command. And, they spent, once they'd gone to ground, unlike the auxiliary units, they wouldn't be coming outside again.
Yeah.
And once they were in their bunker, they were there, and they had enough rations for 3 weeks to stay underground and pass on messages. And again, it's that thing of 3 weeks is likely to be it. The Germans would have found it. And interestingly, there was no, as I said before, there was no connection between the auxiliary units and the special duties branch, especially in those early days. So even though the information that the special duties guys were collecting could have been really useful to the auxiliary units, they had no idea about each other, even though they were all in the same counties, and quite often their various bunkers were quite close to each other. There's a really good exception to this story where an auxiliary was on patrol. He was walking around his local area, and he came across an entrance to what he recognised as a bunker, very similar to the one he was based in. And he was like, well, this is a bit weird because this is quite close to mine. There probably isn't another patrol around here. I'd better investigate it. So he opened the hatch, went down the ladder, and was confronted at the bottom by an ATS girl pointing a gun at his head, saying, what the hell? So basically, the ATS girl, all she knew was this guy coming down in denims, heavily armed. He discovered a bunker he didn't know what it was about. They didn't know about each other at all. Mm. She was pointing a gun at his head. Eventually, they kind of came to agreement that neither were German spies, and they were, quite all right.
There needed to be a safe word or something.
Yeah, correct. But the most remarkable part of this story is they later got married. I mean, what?
I envisioned them standing there screaming at each other like, Marmite, it's okay.
I know, but they got married. I mean, what a way to meet your partner. I mean,
I love that story. Do you know what? That's oddly romantic.
Isn't it? But I guess the other thing is, because they both signed the Official Secrets Act, when people ask, well, how did you meet? They couldn't.
Starbucks. It'll be like all those
online
people that meet on Tinder, and they go, if anyone asks, we met in Starbucks.
I know, how funny. Yeah. Just remarkable, isn't it? Just remarkable. And actually, their son later marched with us past the Stone Staff, representing both branches. But so there's no connection between the two. But very similarly, everyone involved in special duties recognised the fact that this was a suicide mission, recognised that it was only going to be for a set amount of time. Again, it's not there for after occupation. This isn't the French resistance. This is passing on information about an invading army, about an active invading army, and giving the regular forces a chance to group where they know they can attack, because they know exactly where they're going, which direction the army's going, and what they have with them.
Germany doesn't invade, clearly. So how do these guys contribute to the war effort?
It's interesting because the auxiliary units, some recruited into the SAS and SOE. And their training obviously came in handy, and they could make a real contribution, a tangible contribution to the war effort. The special duties was slightly different. I mean, they couldn't do anything active in terms of being recruited into the regular forces. In fact, the ATS women at the stand down, it was really hard for them to get another job within the ATS because they weren't regular ATS soldiers. They'd not been trained in the same way. So most of them just at stand down kind of just left. But what they did, and there's a rumour of something they did do, is that during the lead up to D-Day, during Operation Fortitude, which was the operation to deceive the Germans into thinking that there was invading army across the Channel at Calais, or to invade Calais, and there's one in Scotland to invade Norway, to take the heat off Normandy. There's a rumour that special duties were given new radio sets, and they were basically told to broadcast any old rubbish that came into their head across open channels, to persuade the German army that there was an army group ready to invade across to Calais. So there's a rumour they were part of Operation Fortitude. There's not absolute proof that this happened, but it seems like it would have been a really good use of their expertise, and that was certainly something that at least one author has said happened. So that was quite interesting that they were picked for this very specific mission using their radio skills. But other than that, it was quite difficult for them to be transferred to other areas because they were so specially trained in what they were doing. So it was hard for them to contribute wider. But that's certainly one area which they were apparently used was Operation Fortitude, which again was hugely successful because Hitler kept divisions and divisions in the Pays de Calais waiting for the real invasion to come across.
How many of them have you actually been able to speak to?
As I said, very few, really. There was a guy called Arthur Gabatas, who was a sergeant in this signals corps, who spoke to people, and he was quite helpful in providing some maps of where each of these networks were. There was Beatrice Temple, rather illegally, I suspect, kept a diary. So we have some transcripts of her and her job in terms of going around to these ATS women all over the country and just making sure they were okay. Because once they were assigned to a bunker or to a county, there was no daily checks. There's one example of an ATS girl committing suicide in a bunker, just because it was just spending days underground in this dank darkness was just depressing and horrible, and so it was really, really quite tough. But Beatrice Temple had this diary which recorded bits. But in terms of civilians, as I said, hardly anything. There's one or two. There's the lady who was a teenager at the time who was recruited as an observer. Her dad was a key man, so one of the wireless operators. But other than that, we have virtually nothing. And again, they just, at stand down or at the end of the war, because they hadn't done anything, they weren't called into action. Most of them just kind of disappeared into daily life and got on with it. And so we have hardly any first-hand recruit, especially from the messengers, the runners, the guys who took message from dead letter drop to dead letter drop. There's virtually I'd say like ones and twos that have actually spoken about it. Most of what we get are, there was that rumour of these guys who would run around with messages or the spies in the Maltster's Arms example. That's the type of thing that we get that point towards what the special duties were up to, but virtually nothing. Of course, we've got the remains sometimes of these bunkers that the ATS women were in, like the auxiliary units bunkers. So we find them, and they're often on high ground, kind of in the area where they'd be receiving the messages from the civilian wireless operators. So we have the remains of these bunkers. We occasionally find the area of where a civilian had their wireless set, so like that bunker under the outside toilet. But very, very, very little. I mean, the way they kept the secret is just remarkable. I mean, 3,250 at least people were involved in this. And, up until relatively recently, nothing was known about this at all.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining us and talking to us about this virtually unknown part of history. I mean, I didn't know about it, Alex didn't know about it, and it's just amazing that you've been able to come on board and tell us a little bit more of what we do know. Yeah,
my pleasure. And look, if anyone out there has any information or knows of rumours around their village of spies or people acting a bit weirdly during the war, then please get in touch, because the more information we gather on these guys, the better, because it's absolutely, we think, really, really important that these guys get the recognition, even though most of them are dead, get the recognition that they deserve for the sacrifice that they were willing to make had Operation Sea Lion happened.
Join us tomorrow when Carolyn Willikes will be with us to talk all about horses in the ancient world. A bit of myth-busting going on here, and a bit of setting the record straight from terrible films like Alexander, and telling you exactly how and when we started our human-horsey relationship and how it evolved in the ancient world, so don't miss that. Don't forget that we do exist on Patreon as History Hack and on Patreon as well, which is Podbean's own version. Alina and I have had massive fun doing this in 2020, but life is going to change quite a lot next year, and we're going to actually have to go and earn a living, etc. If we want to keep up the regularity that we've been bringing you and the kind of guests that we've been bringing you and the workload, then we will need your help. The incentives for joining on either of those platforms, we're revamping ourselves on both of them, so don't forget to go in. You can do as little as $1 a month, and it all goes towards keeping up History Hack as regular as we've been able to bring it to you this year. We are now on YouTube. We are posting all of our new episodes on there, and we have our own channel, and we are gradually posting all of the back episodes because we have been made aware of the fact that you can only find the last 100 on some platforms. So you can go and listen to your heart's content and laugh at the cartoons and have a great time. So do go over there and subscribe.